and we're live on a new Socratic Vibes episode 3. Sorry, everyone, it's a little early for me. Here was Ayn, how you doing? I'm sorry, Dr. Timbit, how you doing?
Yeah, the name keeps changing. I need to settle on something at some point. Doing well, Caleb. Enjoying the drip of the intro. I keep, whenever I host, I always do the wrong intro. I forget how awesome they've gotten.
Yeah, I want to eventually make one for you and Moses, but your vibe is very hard to nail down.
Yeah.
Last one I made was it was a picture of a penguin, a yellow goblin on a desk with Jacques Maritain behind it with the Burger King hat. And that's a good image, but I can't get the music right.
Yeah, how do you set that to music? I don't know.
So I ended up looking up Brazilian funk. Maybe Brazilian vibes will work. But today we're going to be covering another Jacques Maritain book, which is mainly what I seem to have you on for. It's I got to cover Jacques Maritain. What's I'm doing? Covering Education at the Crossroads by Maritain, which was a speech he gave actually somewhere in America. I don't know where it was, but
yes, so this is a series of lectures actually at Yale University. There was some lecture series. I'm not get the right name for it because I saw it in the little forward here. Yeah, so it was the Dwight Harrington Terry Lectures on Religion in the Light of Science and Philosophy. But this was some Yale University initiative that he was the annual speaker for in 1943.
I think it might have been a radio broadcast or an interview he did on campus, because I remember hearing an interview he did, like a recorded radio one in America, when I think was interviewed by some campus radio show at Yale. So there might be an associated interview with this.
Okay, interesting. I did not know that.
It's very hard to listen to because it's college radio from the 40s, and he has a heavy French accent. It does not come through the quality well enough to understand him. But every once in a while, you get a sentence, and you're like, that's a very good sentence, Mr. Maritain. Thank you. Once I understood everything else you were saying. But it's going to be fun. Like with most Maritain stuff, anyone listening, he's very hard to cover without reading this entire paragraph from, because he writes so well. Any attempt to summarize will fail. So I'm going to read a quote, and we'll react to it, talk about it, and then if I have any quotes, he'll read one, and I'll read another quote, and we're not covering the whole book today, just the first 25 pages or so, because it's dense. But anything you want to add about the book before we get into it?
I don't think so. I think he's going to speak for himself pretty well for the most part. Like you said, he I haven't heard a lot of his interviews. I imagine his French accent is hard to understand, but his prose is excellent, and oftentimes will speak for itself. So like you said, I think we were originally planning on sort of just talking about this book, but there was too much that we needed to let him speak for himself. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah,
I would say it's funny how anytime you try to cover Maritain, even the smallest books end up having to be multi-part series. Like we took how many live reads to these 3 reformers? Like 6.
It was something like that. Yeah, it was more than one per reformer. So.
Yeah, and then we ended up having to get guests on there. We brought on, I think we had Jay on one time for the Lusso one.
Yes, yeah, we had Jay on at some point. I think we had somebody else for Rousseau, but I'm not positive. Anyways.
Yeah, it was that was a fun. Anyone listening needs to go back and check it out. I think I have on Sano the entire, all of them combined into one long stream, I think. Or maybe it's Monarchy and War I have that for. But either way, go back to Sano, find them, check them out. They're very good. But let's get into this. Okay. The first one I want to read is kind of the opening paragraph, kind of to set the tone. And bear with me as I read, because it's pretty early for me. The general title I have chosen is Education at the Crossroads. I might also have entitled these chapters The Education of Man, though such a title may unintentionally seem provocative, for many of our contemporaries know primitive man, or Western man, or man of the Renaissance, or the man of the industrial era, or the criminal man, or the bourgeoisie man, or the working man, but they wonder what is meant by when we speak of man. Of course, the job of education is not to shape Platonist man of himself, but to shape a particular child belonging to a given nation, a given social environment, a given historical age. Yet before and being a child of the 20th century, an American-born or European-born child, a gifted or retarded child, this child is the child of man, before being a civilized man. One, I love the use of the word retarded in that. I also think it's a great point. He points out, everyone, when you say education of man, people think, oh, they know man in the animal sense or man in the Renaissance, but, we're studying man, and education isn't just, it is, how do I put it, when you're crafting it's something you have to take into account. Okay, where are we at socially? What civilization are we in? What is the tradition behind where we live? The cultural connections. But in the same sense, every man needs to be educated, or ought to be educated in some way. So there's a sense you have to look at the Platonic form of what man is, and then look at the particulars of where you are when you're teaching. But I think it's a great point to open it up with.
Yeah, I think what also I find so interesting about reading Maritain, and I think this is just evidence of what a good thinker he is obviously, we're reading briefly, he comes from this very deep scholastic, Thomistic understanding of his faith, but also philosophy, and it's such a totalizing philosophy in the sense that, okay, when he wants to approach how do we go about education, how do we do education, he starts from a lot of these insights of scholasticism or Thomism. So we have to, like, what he gets into very shortly after this is, okay, what is a man? How do we what is man as man? What is man as social animal? And based on that understanding from his Thomism, that's how he builds out his understanding of education, and that's how any of his understanding gets built out. And I love how unified and whole his philosophy is, that it can be applied to everything. And
we'll see that more later when he gets into, like, this. He has a whole little, like, diatribe on truth and studying truth for itself sake. Let me see if I can find a quote real quick here. What is it? Here you go. Truth, which does not depend on us but on what is. Truth is not a set of ready-made formulas to be passively recorded so as to have the mind closed and enclosed by them. Truth is an infinite realm, as infinite as being, whose wholeness transcends infinity, all powers of perception, and each fragment of which must be grasped to vital and profound internal activity. Like, he has a whole little diatribe here just on truth and studying the truth for truth's sake and where truth comes from. And that's just the little part of the whole fan of the book on education in general. Like, he is very cohesive. Again, it's great part reading him, like you said. Anything we read from him, like, oh yeah, it fits so well into the theme of Thomism, into cast of Thomism that Maritain writes about. It's all connected. This is incredible.
And I think it's a sign of one of his genius, but also of the beauty of his understanding of the world. That if you read him, you say, okay, yeah, because I've read this other thing from him about something completely unrelated, everything he is saying is perfectly logical and follows. And if I was as brilliant as him, I could have come up with it on my own, just knowing this philosophy. Of course, you have to sort of have his insight and his brilliance to follow through, but there's nothing new being added on. There is truth, and there's the proper understanding of truth, and everything follows from it logically.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Like, when it comes to most philosophers have, like, they like screwed into someone, like they have a new idea or some new way of phrasing it or some new way of translating it to the masses. But a lot of Thomists just become exegetes of St. Thomas and Aristotle, and they kind of, no, they figured it out. How do we apply this today? And they just kind of exegete and then apply. They don't really have to be the same level of. They don't have to try to be novel in a sense, you know.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
This is incredible. Do you have any quote you want to read before we move on to the next quote?
So I just want to wrap up that sort of idea, because he's talking about what education is, for falling from where you were. It says, if it is true, moreover, that our chief duty consists, according to the profound saying of the Greek poet Pindar, in becoming who we are, nothing is more important for each of us or more difficult than to become a man. Thus, the chief task of education is above all to shape man, or to guide the evolving dynamism through which man forms himself as a man. This is why I may have taken my title, The Education of Man. And that it's so succinct but so profound, saying that the end of education is to become a man.
Mm-hmm.
Is to make yourself what you are or what you are supposed to be.
To education is to help you fulfill your teleology.
Yes.
It's incredible. Which is, we're going to get into later how that's been completely kind of ignored because of hyper specialization. We'll get into that towards the end of the later half of this podcast. But okay, the next quote. Man is not merely an animal of nature like a skylark or a bear. He is also an animal of culture, whose race can subsist only within the development of society and civilization. He is a historical animal, hence the multiplicity of cultural and ethno-historical patterns into which man is diversified. I really like that point, because in so much of today we think of this man in the abstract. Like, simultaneously, every man is a hyper individual. It's just man on his own. But simultaneously, this is a black man. Therefore, he has educational problems because they give him more affirmative action stuff. But this is an Asian guy. He's going to be in anyway lower the affirmative action. So we've ignored the education when it comes to cultural. When it comes to education, we've ignored cultural and historical practices, but only focused on hierarchies of needs, basically, but projected needs onto these individuals. Like, oh, this black guy needs affirmative action, this Asian guy gets a less chance because he's Asian, and completely ignoring this is actually why I love. Have you heard of Dr. Umar?
I don't think so. No, I don't think I have.
He's a black supremacist, Malcolm X type of guy, and he's opening a black-only school called the Marcus Garvey Academy, where he's going to have classes on black spirituality, black history, black economics, and basically it's just a school focusing only on black people, for black people, taught by black people, and it's just meant to kind of he wants to bring back the African black culture for young black people, and then educate them to go out into the world and succeed, and to succeed in black neighborhoods, to help other black neighborhoods succeed. Which I think is actually, if you wanted to solve any problem, that is a good way of going about it.
Yeah, and something a little bit what Maritain does here, and he gets into this in more detail when he starts talking about individualism and personality and the social role, is I think that there's a lot of confusion, and there's certainly was going to be a lot of confusion, certainly in the 40s when he's giving these lectures on, and he'll be more concrete about this, on what man is, and this idea of man as a social animal is that we are individuals. Our highest powers is our intellect. Our intellect has its ultimate end in knowing truth, but we are very much a part of history and a part of a society. And the understanding of what the role of that society is so clear, and it's something that libertarians don't really get. It's something that sort of rugged individualists don't get. It's something that certainly the mainstream doesn't get. But that it's as much as our ends are personal in nature. That my end is truth, is knowing truth myself. I have an obligation to society and a role in society to towards the common good, that everyone can achieve that truth.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that I think he gets into it here. Yeah, is this idea, okay, that there's if our highest end is truth, and there is a lot to know, I will say sort of flippantly, right? The ends of knowledge are infinite. And we have finite lives and finite means to know things, that we can build on tradition, we can build on what came before. There is a role for society in aiding our education, so that we don't start as we don't start our education sort of as a blank slate and learn everything on its own. Other people have learned things and we can learn from them. And
yes.
So society has this key role in education of providing stepping stones or guideposts or getting us along the way, that we can come up to speed with what our society has learned, and we can do that a lot faster than trying to just learn it on our own. And that the transmission of this cultural knowledge and the societal knowledge and the what has come before us is such an important part of education, so that we're not starting from the same place every generation.
Absolutely, it's crucial, and it's really just ignored today, in the sense that we not only denigrate our past, denigrate our history, but it's a complete ignorance of cultural differences. Which is really the most annoying part about for me, being what I call racist, quote unquote. When you talk to these liberal people who are the very anti-racist types, they are actually, I would say, more racist, because they want to completely ignore and disregard any cultural specifics. Like, they just want to, nope, everyone's the same, we're going to ignore all of it. It's like, no, but there's really cool stuff about their culture we should celebrate. And they want to just treat everybody, they want to, what's they're looking for, a cookie cutter. They want to put everybody on the cookie cutter and make everyone the same. And it's like, well, we're ignoring how cool some of these cultures have, and some of these cool cultural traditions that you might not approve of, but they're pretty nice, and you just you put everyone in this box of, you make racism about skin color and ignore culture, and it's like, this is ridiculous. Culture is
like their most intense bigotry is a bigotry of the past, right? Like that our own traditions must be denigrated. They must be like, we have to, anything that was the past was automatically wrong and bad and should be gotten rid of. And we also ignore the past and tradition and cultures of any society or culture because we want to make new man. Like it's cliche to call it socialist, but there is this idea of trying to create socialist man, and to do that you have to get rid of everything that came before.
We got to create neoliberal man. That's why they put so many gay books in children's libraries.
Exactly, and why they try and get rid of the classics, right?
Mm-hmm.
There can't be any tie to the past because the past is what was wrong, and the past is what is keeping you from your future. I'm trying to think of the dumb Kamala phrase that keeps getting repeated.
We are unburdened by what has been.
Yeah, to think what can be unburned by what has been, right? Which is the complete opposite of how you achieve new things.
Which is also that quote goes completely against we just fell out of a coconut tree. Like those two quotes are very opposite to each other. And I actually think the coconut tree one actually is a very good point. Like you're not just atomized born into emptiness. You are born to a society and culture and family. And see, to make that point, I'm like, that's actually a very good point. And why is everything to go against that? You know, it's a solid point to make. I don't know. I'm becoming Kamala pilled. It's all over. I'm Kamala pilled now. I'm a brat.
It was destined to happen.
I listened to one too many Nick Fuentes streams.
One would be too many Nick Fuentes streams, but
dude, I saw a video of him dancing. I'm like, oh damn it! I danced like Nick Fuentes. It's so over. It's all over. I have that white boy straggle dance. It's so over.
Nick Fuentes dances like you, Caleb. You're the trendsetter. You inspired him.
Let's get to the next quote.
Okay. So before we get to the quote, because just to sort of set up what he's doing in the rest of this lecture, this chapter of, I think this is probably an individual lecture as part of the series. I'm not exactly sure, but he does say so. In the present chapter, he's going to discuss the aims of education. But what he does is he brings up all of significant misconceptions regarding education. He has 7 in total that are sort of his jumping off points for how we think about education. So I think as we get into probably the next quote, I don't know exactly where you're going next, but he's going to go into each of these 7 different misconceptions about education. So please go ahead with whatever you had.
First, I'm gonna open for you each quote with what misconception he's talking about. The first misconception is a disregard of ends. If means are linked and cultivated for the sake of their own perfection, and not as means alone, to the very extent they cease to lead to the end, and art loses its practicality. Its vital efficiency is replaced by a process of infinite multiplication, each means developing and spreading for its own sake. He's talking about education is an art, and arts have some form of practicability to them. And when you lose that practicability, it ceases to be an art. And in today's education, there is no the only practical thing really taught in the education system is this will be a job, maybe. And what jobs are available, you know? But there is a real sense that education has lost its practical nature, where it's like, well, we teach people so they can get jobs, so they can be good little worker bees in the widget factory. And it's like, but education is supposed to, you know, like we talked earlier, fulfill your T-loss. And I think part of that has to be not only one, like we talked about earlier, understanding your cultural heritage, so reading, say, the classics, so reading books on like great men who came before you, you inherit that tradition. It's just as a practical nature, like how to be among friends, how to socialize, how to be in part of groups, how to because like, I was thinking of Napoleon's education. You know, Napoleon was raised at raised and trained at a military academy where they studied great man, had war games, had competitions, and he learned the social dynamics and how to compete, how to get along. And he has a quote. One time the quote later, I forgot to highlight it, but the quote later was like, "Why not have a so we can't have a class that teaches man how to comfort a woman when she's sad or something, but that's something a man should learn through education, through the process of being educated."
Yeah, it's very, and you know, he's talking about their sort of what he calls these paradoxes of education, how it's has one end, but it can't really do this. Like you said, you can't teach a man to be moral, but you can sort of teach him morality, or you can teach him, I think, what he calls practical reason, but you can't teach him will. And I find this particular misconception, it seems like such an anachronism, because there was this idea in the early part of the 20th century that we're sort of learning new pedagogical techniques and learning these new ways to educate people, and in his mind getting pretty good at it, but losing sight of, okay, what should we teach them? So, okay, we can teach them really well, but there's no end in mind. And I'm reminded a little bit, so I've talked to a bunch of teachers, and they sort of they have to go through college of education type stuff and learn a lot of take a lot of pedagogy classes,
Mhm.
and a lot of it is complete garbage. But one of the things you'll hear is you don't want a teacher to be like sort of a I can't remember there's some stupid term they use or some stupid rhyming phrase. It's not going to come to me. But you don't want to be lecturing and holding forth. You want to be sort of the coach that guides the student to learn whatever they want to learn. And he talks a little bit like there can be good things to that kind of pragmatism, but you were teaching people for a reason. Like you said, you were teaching them for their teleos. And if you disregard that teleos exists, or it's like, we're going to teach them so they can learn whatever, or we're teaching them because we're good at teaching them, and there's no end to it, you don't end up with anything coherent. I think it's in a slightly different section, but he talks at some point about like if architecture didn't have an end and you just sort of started building and you say, okay, well, we can put some more stuff here, and we can put another room here, and we can put some stairs here, and there's no vision to it, there's no end. You don't end up with a house. You might end up with some some parts that sort of make sense, but you don't actually end up building anything. Like you said, the art is gone.
No, it's on that point you made earlier. How'd you put it? So my mind is blanking on me again because I didn't have a Red Bull or anything this morning. I woke up and listeners, I'm raw dogging the podcast from the TikTok meme. No energy drinks, no nicotine, just straight locked in. And as you can see, I'm clearly not locked in.
You need to go on some kind of cleanse or something like that. I think the 20 hours of sunlight a day is messing with your circadian rhythm.
Well, dude, I'm also getting the sun's always out, so my sleep schedule is just completely fucked. But also, I'm getting paler. I can look in the mirror and tell my arms are not as tan as they used to be. I'm losing the Floridian golden blondes I had attained. And I'm gonna be a pasty white guy. It's gonna be awful.
Winter is going to be hard. You need to get like one of those infrared lamps or something, or get a vitamin D prescription. Like, I'm serious. Like, you're going to have a rough time when there's no sun.
I do need to get a vitamin D, some vitamin D stuff. Because my mama said that I get like a self tanning, and I can start just rubbing self tanning lotion on my arms. I'm like, I'm not a woman. I'm not doing that. But if you do see me come out of the next podcast looking oins, you know I did. So let's get into the next misconception, because we're already 30 minutes in and we're only on the second one.
Go for it.
Second misconception: the false ideas concerning ends. Now, I actually didn't highlight anything on this little one, but I want to say he gets into more specifically into the idea of man, because to understand what something is for, you have to understand what something is, and what's the causes. To know what a table is for, you have to know what a table is. So he gets into the scientific and philosophical religious ideas of man and the Christian ideas of man. Once again, this points back to his whole, it's a cohesive system. Education. Well, what's the part of education? We don't know where we're going. Well, how do we know where we're going? Well, what are we training? He has a whole chapter almost on just man, what is a man, and the Christian idea of man. And he has this quote here that kind of wraps it up that I'm going to finish it with. In answer to our question, then, what is man? We may give the Greek, Jewish, and Christian idea of man. Man is an animal endowed with reason, whose supreme dignity is the intellect, and man is free individual in personal relation with God, whose supreme righteousness consists in voluntarily obeying the laws of God, and a man is sinful and wounded creature called to divine life, and to the freedom of grace, whose supreme perfection consists in love. That's the case. Also, man isn't called for much greater things, like consists of love, and this incredible quote on what is man. And instead of one line answer, he gives a whole little about made me think of the Saint Irenaeus' quote, like the glory of God is man fully alive.
Yes.
It's just fantastic.
He takes these ideas because as practicing Catholics, we've heard these ideas before, but he has a way of making it so succinct and so beautiful. Like, I love it. It's like, yep, here's what humanity is according to the church, and it's beautiful. But yeah, like you said, you have to do this, and I think this step is so easily ignored in education or anything. Is okay, if the goal of education is making a man, is making yourself what you were supposed to be, you have to know what you're supposed to be. Like, you have to know what you are, and you have to have some kind of framework for that. And he mentions a couple of different ones. He talks about this empirical scientistic one where you are basically just an animal that responds to stimuli and can do some social things. But But then your education can't do any more than that. It can't even ask you to ask those questions, right? It can't lead you towards asking, okay, what is a soul? Do I have a soul?
Mhm.
If your conception of man doesn't include those things, if you have a purely rationalistic view of man, there's no real coherent end. Like you said, you can teach them to do a job, or you can teach them to make money and not starve to death. And then you're basically trying to make them really good animals, or really good mere animals, I should say.
He has that point later where it's like when he's talking about the hyper-specified specification of ends, where it's like we're going to have hyper-specified fields of knowledge and people are going to be experts in those one thing. He makes the analogy of an animal is a hyper-specialized intellect, quote-unquote, for completing one task, and there's like an animalization of man in education, trying to make him only good for one task and never speak on a different task. Which is I actually love that analogy, like the hyper specialized animal. You know, the animal is a hyper specialized being for one task, and trying the animalization of man. I thought that was just a really great way of putting it. Because I've been wondering, I've complained about the hyper specification in education for a while now, but this is a really succinct way of explaining the big problem I have with it.
Yeah, and I think, again, he's speaking in the 40s, but the sort of modern equivalent way of phrasing this is you're trying to turn man into a computer. Right, you're trying to you're trying, or make him a cog, or make him a piece of software that he executes whatever task, and he executes it well. And the thing that I think causes so much discomfort now is we see, okay, if you're just trying to make a man a computer, there are a lot better computers out there. Like, you know, if your entire job as man is to be the best computer you can be, you're going to get out-computered by a computer. If you're becoming the best man you can be, there's things computers can't do, right? Computers don't have souls. Computers don't really have telos in the same way, because they don't exist in the same way. But I think so much of the sort of weird modern post-humanism distress or concerns about what a more technological future looks like, a lot of it comes down to is, okay, we're like, computers are better at being computers than we are. What do we do? And it's because we don't realize our goal is not to be a computer. And again, these are ideas that Aristotle had, but that we've forgotten. Okay, yeah, there is something more to me, right? There is a verifiably existent spiritual that computers don't have, that mere animals don't have. And that's what we are called to. We are higher than that. And again, through a Christian understanding, through revelation, we can know that we are called to be in personal relation with God.
Well, actually,
my laptop
on that
isn't.
point, I have this very long quote here from him that basically is on that exact point. So let me just
Sure.
read it out here. It's actually, I think it's like a paragraph or two, so bear with me.
Go for it.
He does not, speaking of man, he does not merely exist as a physical being. There is in him a richer and nobler existence. He has spiritual super existence, true knowledge and love. He is just in some way a whole, not merely a part. He is a universe unto himself, a microcosm in which the great universe in its entirety can be encompassed through knowledge and through love. He can give himself freely to beings who are to him, and as it were, other selves. And for this relationship, no equivalent can be found in the physical world. If we seek the prime root of all of this, we are led to the acknowledgement of the full philosophical reality of the concept of the soul, so variegated in its connotations, which Aristotle described as the first principles of life in any organism, and viewed as endowed with supernatural intellect in man. So supermaterial intellect in man, which Christianity revealed as the dwelling place of God and made for eternal life. In the flesh and bones of man, there exists a soul, which is a spirit, and which is a greater value in the whole physical universe. Dependent though it may be on the slightest accidents of matter, the human person exists by virtue of the existence of his soul, which dominates time and death, and the spirit which is the root of his personality. He's so good.
Yeah, he is. It's an idea that he gets into in Degrees of Knowledge as well when he's talking about epistemology, and I think it's so profound, and it's something that I think goes missed so often. We remember like that a single human soul, that a single intellect is more than the entire physical universe. Right? It's like the inversion of that quote about how we are all made of stardust. It's like stardust doesn't have shit on my soul. Right, the entire extent of the physical extent of the entire universe is much less than one human soul.
And this is the paradox, I think, of Christian man, and what's that we can affirm that we are the soul that indwells our bodies, or not indwells, that is part of our bodies, Again, I never quite sort of how to properly frame it all in a Aristotelian sounding way. We have to remember that, can affirm that, but simultaneously, every Ash Wednesday, we are dust, and to dust we shall return. This is the paradox of man that I really love.
Yes. But it's also like just seeing that supreme dignity of man. Okay, like, you know, each individual has this much to them, this much more than we can really comprehend. While simultaneously, like you said, the humility of being as little as we are is pretty profound. But yeah, this is what he gets into, this idea of personality, because that's what he's getting at, or what he calls personality is this sort of internal freedom, or this internal unity that an intellect, that an immaterial soul gives us. And then this contrast with the fact that we are still, that's what he goes into next, and maybe you have a quote there, that we are also individuals, right? That we are embodied, and that we, like, you know, one me is different from another you, and that we have that we have this material existence that is very, very limited compared to the unlimited and you know, he says that the human soul is the way in which we say that we're made in the likeness of God, is in that we have personality, in a way analogous to what the Trinity has, and yet, you know, we are individual, right? We are part of a species in this very limited way.
Yeah, he gets into personality, individuality here. I could read this entire saying because it's so good, but I'm just going to read the ending part of it, I think.
Sure.
And what matters most in the educational enterprise is a perpetual appeal to intelligence and free will in the young. Such an appeal, finally proportioned to age and circumstances, can and should begin with the first educational step. Each field of training, each school activity, physical training as well as elementary reading, or the rudiments of childhood etiquette and morals, can be intrinsically improved and can outstrip its own immediate practical value. To being humanized in this way by understanding, nothing should be required without explanation, without making sure that science has understood. So that wasn't the quote I was looking for, but it's still a good one. I really love the ending point here, where it's like so much I think of when kids ask why. Again, there's a paradox as well, and I think when it comes to the modern series of education, and what's like, oh, kids are always like destroying things and messing with things. They want to know. They just want to know everything, and sometimes the kids don't really want to know. They want fantasy. You know, they want to play with their toys and engage in fantasy. And there's kind of a paradox in there. But kids, when they're told something, well, you know, you're a parent, so you told the kids time to go to bed, and the kid has said why. You know.
Yeah.
And it was something, which I understand when a parent says, because I said so, because they're tired of answering questions. I completely understand that. Because anyone who's been around a toddler for more than an hour will eventually say, because I said so. It's completely valid. But also, there is something, when certain parents say that too much, and the kid begins to not wonder why, but only either to respect or rebel against authority rather than understanding authority. And I think that's an outcome that we've seen more and more occurring with today's kids. You have kids from out here today who either only rebel against authority, only respect authority, but never really question the authority because they've never been given an answer.
Yeah, and I think this is his first nice piece of concrete advice. Because I mean, ultimately, this is about how do we do education. And I'm certainly trying to take what I can from this to actually put it into practice. Okay, like how does the education of my own children, how should it proceed? What should I focus on? And like we were just talking about, you know, there is this dignity to the intellect that we need to respect at all steps of education. So that when you try and teach them anything, when you tell them to do anything, it's never just okay. You need to. It's because this is how you be a good computer. This is how you carry out your role. It needs to be based on a deep understanding. And again, that depth of understanding is going to vary. You know, your 2-year-old isn't going to understand things the same way your 4-year-old will, or your 6-year-old, or your 15-year-old. But it always needs to accompany an explanation that is concordant with their with their ability to understand. Otherwise, you aren't really treating them as a human.
Which is why I will always defend Santa Claus and ghost stories and myths, because a 2-year-old may not understand the implications of why being good is good. But if you say, if you're a good kid around Christmas and you get gifts, that might be a lie, but also it's creating a fantasy that explains the world that matches to the understanding they have. Which is why I also like think of the way the Greeks accounted for thunder as the gods being angry. That was the understanding that could fit their level, and it explains something to them, and they still engage their intellect and trying to come to that conclusion. So this is I'm never going to denigrate Santa Claus or fantasy for kids as explanations.
And it still conveys some real level of truth. It might be metaphorical, or it might be sort of hidden in the bigger fantasy, like you said. But it's like, you do good things because you were rewarded for it, because good things come to it, and eventually they can understand that reward comes in heaven, that it becomes in just living a good life, that being a good man is its own reward. But that builds on this understanding of, I do good things because they are good, because they result in good, and other people do good things for me because of my good and love me, because it builds deeper truths that might not be literal truths, if that makes sense.
Yes, this just reminds me of, speaking of education, so we're answering questions. It reminds me of probably the only funny Joe Rogan bit I heard in a stand-up, when he's talking about having to answer his kids' questions. Like, he's trying to put his kid to bed, and the kid goes, "Why can birds fly?" Well, because birds have hollow bones, and they're very light, so therefore they can fly. It's like, why do birds have hollow bones? Like, no, I'm trying to fuck your mom. Go to bed. Which is probably the only bit I think he has that's really funny, but it's a pretty funny bit. But I will say that I really love, like, when it gets practical, it's very simple but very profound practical advice. Like, you shouldn't denigrate a kid's intellect by not explaining something when a kid asks. To an extent, and you should always try to match, like you said, try to match the explanation to where they're at. What I think is, again, the importance of fairy tales and children's stories cannot be underestimated, I think, because they can provide profound moral truths in ways kids will understand.
And it occurs to me here, and this just came to me, but I think it's really cool. I really think he's kind of following his own advice, because again, what he's trying to educate people on how to educate, right? But he doesn't just say, make sure you tell your child why you're doing so. You give an explanation. He literally just gives 10 pages of explanation about why we should explain things to our children. Like, he is very much trying to do the exact same thing as he is, acknowledging his readers and his audience as humans who can understand and who can know, and he is using that to as a way to teach. Right? He's not just giving a prescription of how to do things. He is building it on an understanding of what we are.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to the next one concerning the aims of education. We're only on number 2.
We can pick up pace.
Yeah, this is gonna have to be maybe just 2 parts for the first quarter. Once again, this is gonna be a series. I might need to make another intro for it. Again, the thing with Belloc and Chesterton on the series, anytime we try to cover these great 20th century Catholics, you always have to be multi-part episodes, because they're just such good writers. Mm-hmm. But concerning the aims of education, the aim of education is to guide man in the involving I can never say that word out loud, dynamism, to which he shapes himself as a human person, armed with knowledge, strength, and judgment, and moral virtues, while at the same time conveying to him the spiritual heritage of the nation and civilization in which he is involved, and preserving in this way the century-old achievement of generations. The utilitarian aspect of education, which enables you to use to get a job and make a living, must surely not be disregarded, but for the children are not made for aristocratic leisure, but this practical aim is best provided by the general human capacities developed at the ulterior specialized training, which may be required, must never imperil the essential aim of education.
So there's somebody, you're gonna have to fill for a second, Caleb. There's somebody at my door. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Take your time. Vamp. I'm vamping, boys. Vamp. Okay, sorry, I didn't really think that long, so I was hoping I could just vamp the entire time, but regardless. Anyone listening, by the way, you should definitely pick up this book. It's not too long. It's only 118 pages. You could knock it out in a weekend if you really wanted to. And it's, speaking of education, I don't know if we're going to get into this episode, but hopefully during the series we'll get into more of a particular part of education that I think is important, is the inspirational part of education. This is why I'm a big advocate of great men. To quote Thomas Carlyle, history is the biographies of great men. I think one thing, only the truth to understand history, true to the great men who move history, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, there's something incredibly inspirational about the study of great man. Like Napoleon, when he was being raised, he studied great man history. He studied Alexander and Julius Caesar. Napoleon wanted to be Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar wanted to be Alexander. Alexander wanted to be Achilles. And Achilles was awesome. So I think that's something hopefully we'll get into later, is the practical importance of inspiration and education. Okay, I'm running out of things I can vamp on here, boys. I'm gonna grab a vape, I guess. Give me a second. This is fantastic radio. Yeah, fantastic. I'm just gonna move on to the next quote here while we're waiting on Ayn. Thus, the prime goal of education is the conquest of eternal and spiritual freedom to be achieved by the individual person, or in other words, his liberation through knowledge and wisdom, goodwill and love. Again, the purpose of education is not just knowledge. It's not just, oh, I know things now. I can go be a cog in a machine, or I can be a hyper-specified computer cyborg person trying to work in some office with a bunch of, Gen Z Zoomer girls with the, doing the dances in the corner. Which, god awful. That sounds so awful. Just, kill me if I ever have to suffer through that. But the point of education is, the prime goal of education, it says, is his liberal. Let me read it again here. Yeah, I'm having a vamp here, and Barry's not back yet.
I'm back.
Oh, he's back, thank God.
So sorry about that. I hate to put you in that spot, but yeah.
I tried my best to vamp. I got into a little rant about, not rant, but a little explanation of the importance of inspiration and education about, the study of great man. Like I said, I don't know if we're going to get into that this episode, but hopefully later in the series we'll get into, I think, a crucial part of education that has been completely ignored is the inspiration of young people by studying great men. Like Napoleon wanted to be Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar and Alexander because he studied them in school. And Julius Caesar wanted to be Alexander. Alexander wanted to be Achilles. Like the great men inspire other great men. And then refused to study great men, and instead studying what we call bottom-up history. We studied the losers who, they protested if what they made saying is retarded. I would never get over how much I can. But listen, bottom-up history is the dumbest shit I've ever heard of. It's like we're going to talk about the protesters and the losers and freaks who didn't do anything instead of talking about those who actually willed power and moved it. At least the sadness versus gutter up history is at least entertaining. At least it's history of like how prostitutes bought houses, normalized house buying for women. It's at least funny. This bottom-up history is bullshit.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't think Maritain gets into that here, but maybe later.
Yeah, maybe later, because that's something I think is like, whenever I think of like educational policy, like that's my go-to solution is great men books.
Yep.
I read a quote while you were gone. Let me read it again for you so you can get a reaction. Thus, the prime goal of education is the conquest of eternal and spiritual freedom to be achieved by the individual person, or in other words, is liberation through knowledge and wisdom, goodwill and love. I love this point because it's the conquest of internal and spiritual freedom. And again, that puts freedom in the context of in the Catholic context, not necessarily in the liberal context of freedom just meaning options. Yes,
and Maritain will use the term liberal and liberal education, but he means it very much in this sort of proper sense, as in this idea of this internal freedom that he talks about. To sort of fulfill our ability to be persons.
That's what I say real quick on liberalism. If you were a post-World War I Catholic living in France, you were going to be a liberal.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to be a liberal. And honestly, his liberalism, if you read it in a lens of he's hopeful for the future, it's all understandable.
Yes, and he does do a good job of seeing the good in the liberal movement and in the liberal understanding, right? Like, this another good point. Like, there is no ideology, no matter what it is, if it is at all coherent, if it is at all popular, there is some good in it, right? It could be completely corrupted, completely perverted, result in terrible things, but there's always some nugget or core of truth in there. Otherwise, it would just be gibberish. And he does a great job of latching on to like, okay, here is the good in the liberal idea, and let's pretend that's the movement, and we can sort of support that.
Before, liberal multiculturalism is not inherently a bad ideal if you have a unified metacultural narrative to go behind. For example, Catholicism, or as Malcolm X wanted to be, Islam. Like there is a point to that.
You have to have a telos, right? You have to have an overarching goal. You have to have an end. It's like, okay, our multiculturalism is in service of the betterment of man, and we know what man is. If it's multiculturalism in service of multiculturalism, again, it's the same problem we talked about in the first misconception. We don't have ends anymore. We don't have an end anymore. We only have means.
Exactly. Which is why they never let the I made this point. I've seen Tom Holland. I've been listening to a lot of Tom Holland stuff on history. I don't know if anyone listens. People here probably know who he is. Do you know who he is, Ayn? Tom Holland?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, I listened to some of his books on history. And he has this point that Christianity, the liberal ideas we have today can all be traced back to Christianity's upending of Roman morality and Roman systems. And I think he's kind of got a point, but he's taking it to be like, oh, liberalism is good. It's like, no, I think the problem with liberalism today is that it's so privated. I said this before. Don't let the privations of liberalism turn into the good things, good parts of liberalism that would work under a Catholic system. Like multiculturalism would actually, I think, would be great if you had actual multiculturalism connected around a metacultural narrative of Catholicism. Like, say you're in a town and there's a bunch of Vietnamese people, and on Saturdays you get stuck at a Vietnamese mass. That's kind of cool. That's kind of nice. You still have your mass on Saturdays, but now you have this Vietnamese mass and some Vietnamese food, and you get to interact with people of the cultures, and you're all connected through the faith and the church. You're all members of the church. You're all daughters of Mary. You're all sons of Christ. This is daughters of Christ, sons of God. This is all incredible, and it's the connection they can have. And then now we have these forced to live next to these people, and there's no connection. There is like, oh, we're all Americans? No, you're not American. I'm sorry. And I want that system could work if there was some connection, some thread connecting everybody. And Malcolm X wanted to be Islam. I never get over this part about Malcolm X. Super, super racist until he goes to Mecca and then goes and prayers with white people. He goes, actually, they're not so bad. he kind of has a point. There's something to like that. Religion actually brings people together, even if it's a terrible religion like Islam. That's actually the best part of that Malcolm X movie. Did you see that one, the Malcolm X film by Spike Lee?
I have not, no.
It's actually a pretty good movie. It's pretty fun. Denzel Washington plays Malcolm X and is incredible, as always. But he might just let him back to his girlfriend or wife or something. He's like, I have decided white men aren't that bad. I have to go into mosque with some, and Islam could bring peace to the world by making everyone equal in Islam. It's like, yeah, just be a Catholic and you're right. You're so close, Malcolm X. You're so close.
Yeah.
But enough of a little tirade about liberalism and multiculturalism. I wanted to get that out of the way, actually, because anytime we cover Maritain, it's always like, he was a liberal, and they bring up every liberal thing, like, oh, the UN Rights of Man document he helped write. Like, he was a hopeful French Catholic in the 40s.
Are you going to say there was nothing good in that document? Like that there is no intrinsic value to talking about the rights of man? Like whether it's been corrupted, whether it's been confused, whether what they're in, like the idea that it's a completely negative document, that there is nothing of value in it, is just idiotic.
It is. And I hope one of rights, like, again, I'm not a big believer in rights per se, unless you refer to obligations. Like, you don't have a right to life. We have an obligation not to murder you. Like, right. There's a difference there. And I think but every time Catholics talk about rights, they really mean obligations, and it makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it's the inversion of the rights to be a positive right instead of an obligation not to do something. That's the mistake. It's not the concept itself; it's the application of that concept that's been mistaken. God, are we becoming Catholic liberals on this podcast, Barry?
Probably, yeah. No, I mean, like we both have like. There's a reason we both come from libertarianism in terms of like the whatever weird political philosophical journey we've taken. Because again, there are good nuggets in there. They have to be properly understood. They have to be properly applied to a society. Again, this is why the Catholic Church is so good about everything, because it has taught us how to do these things. But I mean, of course, there is value in those things. They just have to be properly understood. They have to be given. They have to be ordered properly to the relative good. Mm-hmm. But I mean, like there are great things in those ideas. They have been privated and corrupted and made disordered in terms of what is actually important.
And we all know who privated them.
Jacques Maritain. No.
I've decided to do a bit on a podcast. I'm just going to say we all know who, and then be silent for a minute. It's Whatever group the listener picks is going to be funny.
Perfect.
Okay, we only got 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we're going slower than Bulge and I did when we're covering degrees of knowledge. This is getting embarrassing.
We're 12 pages in and it's been an hour. This is okay. Let's do one more quote and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, sounds good.
The third misconception: pragmatism. For an end which makes it worthy of being lived, contemplation and self-perfection, in which human life aspires to flower forth, escape the purview of the pragmatic mind. Very simple, very straightforward, but I actually love that. One of the focuses is contemplation and self-perfection, which is completely ignored by pragmatism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is this, again, I can't stand pragmatic people. Always bug me. And so literally this one line answer to I thought was fantastic.
Yes, and this I mean, he also talks in the same section about this idea of of wanting to know. He doesn't. I don't think he uses the word essences, but that are the ends of our knowledge are not to do things, right? Like we are partly made to know. And so I always like to say there's this idea of give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. The goal of teaching someone is not so that they can eat, right? Someone eats and thrives so that they can know, right? Our ability to know, our end to know, is more important than our end to eat, than to sustain ourselves to survive, right? It is not just about what we can. It's not just about doing or doing well. We have a will. We have an intellect. That, again, our intellect is our highest power, and he talks about this more later when he starts talking about voluntarism, at this rate it'll probably be like 3 podcasts from now because it's 10 pages away. But because the intellect is our highest power, that needs to be where the focus of education is, right? We teach so that people can know, and it's not this idea of, okay, we need to make sure they can do things or that they can accomplish whatever. There is a higher good, there is a higher beauty and grace in knowing. Like you said, kids always ask why, and it's because they want to know, and it's a very pure and a very correct understanding, right? And the answer to that question is that's the thing that kids sort of realize. You can always ask why again, right? Why do birds fly? They have hollow bones. Why do birds have hollow bones? Well, like it's a recursion that ultimately can only get you back to the uncaused cause, right? Eventually, the question of why always leads back to the creator.
Yes,
but that's hard for a 2-year-old. That's hard for a 22-year-old.
Well,
but it is in response to a very deep need that we have, and a very deep part of our nature, that our nature is to know, and not to know so that we can do something, but to know so that we know.
Well, that's Matt Fradd made that point when his kid keeps asking him questions, and eventually always ends it with, because God loves us, because that's why. Which is not a wrong answer, but it's like the Catholic equivalent of because I said so. It's like because God loves us. Which I appreciate that, actually. I thought it was a very good point when he made it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at 52 minutes. Any final thoughts on what we've covered so far, or what you're looking forward to covering next?
Yeah, so what I thought was really interesting about it is, again, we got through 3 of the 7 misconceptions that he goes through in this first chapter, but I'm just so impressed by, like I said, how holistic his view is, that I could be reading one section where he's talking about pragmatism, or he's talking about flipping through pages, trying to find the actual labels, ends and means, and it will very much be applicable when he's talking a couple pages from now about voluntarism, about intellectualism. Like I'm not going to think of the correct of who to attribute this quote to, but this idea that the saints are infinitely varied and amazing and have these incredibly different lives, and all villains are essentially the same. Like there's one story, and there's this really there is because these are misconceptions, because they are errors, they really are sort of all the same thing. There's a denial of truth. They are wrong, and therefore they are less than the full truth. So a lot of these misconceptions, and you see so many of them in modern education. I'm rambling a bit, but I promise I'm getting to a point. He's writing in the 40s. He's seeing the trends developing in education in the 40s, and some of them had blossomed more. Some of them are absolutely like just the state of education now, right? You talked about hyper specialization or pragmatism, or this denial of the idea of an end to education. I don't think anything typifies state education more than we are teaching you so that you can be a good robot and you can do the things you're supposed to do. And to the extent that we teach you anything intellectual, it's so that you can conform to whatever bizarre social standards we have, right? The state can be totalizing, and okay, we need to make sure you're a good citizen. And that's what we'd be getting into next is, okay, like you make a good man before you make a good citizen. You should do both. But the end is to make a good man, and a good man will be a good citizen
Yes.
in a good society. And this is the interesting thing, that, like, again, he's writing in the 40s. He sees a lot of hope for Western society. I'd be very interested to hear him comment on, okay, what about when your society, when your culture has failed, when your society, when being a good citizen is opposed to being a good man, which is the direction we're moving in now. And again, his ideas very clearly spell out what is primary is making a good man, right? And in a healthy society that will line up with being a good person. Yeah.
Well, this is the main reason why I wanted to cover this book soon, and I think it's great to cover it now, is that on one hand, our current education system has gotten so terrible, and not even creating good men, just creating cogs in the machine who adopt a liberal mindset. You know, we all know it. Education is propaganda and indoctrination. It should be propaganda and indoctrination for what is true, not what is false. And to the point, it's all propaganda and indoctrination on false bullshit. And simultaneously, you have this time where parents nowadays have kind of exercised their job of teaching to the schools. You know, it's a common joke in South Park and other stuff that when a kid starts asking sexual questions to the parents go, "Shouldn't your teachers be telling you this stuff? That's their responsibility." Which is a funny joke, but also a lot of parents probably think like that nowadays. And given the uptake in homeschooling, especially and also because of the internet, I figured a book on education would be very helpful for those who want to be parents or want to homeschool, those who are considering homeschooling. And as the huge job of the parent isn't just to raise, it is to educate. And how you go about educating them at home is just as important as they educated at school or in schooling. And so I think this to be a very important book to cover. Hope you get a lot of cool ideas and lessons out of it. I hope it helps people who are listening to it.
Yeah, and also at that point, again, I've got some young kids myself who are getting towards the age where, I mean, you know, learning starts very young, but like formal education is not too far away on the horizon for my oldest, and I really am taking a lot of what Maritain says to heart. And okay, what is, first of all, okay, why are we educating? What is the goal of education? And then what are the important things to think about? Because like you said, I think public education certainly is falling apart, but I think even homeschooling, you know, there's a lot of goodwill there. But I think because it's been generations since we've had a healthy conception of what education is even in homeschooling settings, we've forgotten a lot of, okay, what is the point of this? Why are we doing it? And how do we do it well? And I certainly am taking a lot of this to heart in terms of, you know, if I'm going to homeschool my kids, what that's going to look like. What kinds of things do I need to be focusing on? So I would encourage everyone, you know, if they're listening to us, hopefully they get something out of it, but also, you know, read him directly and really think hard about, okay, what is the proper way to go about education for the good of the child?
I want to say this last little point before I wrap it up on the point of kids always asking why and just getting the answer because I told you so. We have another similar answer given in Protestant circles, at least in where I was growing up. Where if you ask too many theological Christian questions, the answer isn't an actual answer. It's, well, good questions don't ask that kind of question. Which is even worse than because I said so. That's actually, at least because I said so is true. There is a actual authority vested in parenthood that gives them the ability to say that, saying truthfully because I said so is an honest answer. But when it's the answer of a pastor or a youth pastor that says, because good Christians don't do that or ask those questions, that is the most like harming answer someone can give to a young child asking a theological question.
Oh, it is so antithetical to the nature of man. It causes a number of problems. One is it prevents you from learning more about your faith and learning more about God. You know, you are discouraged from understanding more deeply. Whereas again, our teleos is to understand, it is to know. But also, it's why you see so much rebellion as people grow up and they start actually, like, because they have that drive to ask questions. They say, well, I wasn't supposed to ask questions here. Let me go somewhere where I can ask questions. Like, the ability to ask questions is so fundamental to what we are as men, and anything to try and stifle that instinct is incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost up on the hour. Barry, where can people find you at, and what do you have planned coming up next? You both do another Maritain soon?
People can't find me anywhere. I have like no online fingerprint anymore. So I am at Einkath on Twitter. I post basically never at this point. Bulgakov, so available username Bulgakov's Behemoth, and I have been doing a very infrequent and very slow series on Jacques Maritain's magnum opus, The Degrees of Knowledge, on this very channel. We should be picking up wherever we left off on our most recent chapter, hopefully in the next week or two. I think we are scheduled for another one quite soon. Believe it or not, I actually am getting back into writing. I've got 2 articles that are sort of half-baked at this point that Caleb will be getting in the not-too-distant future. They'll probably be popping up on my Substack, which I once again have access to, and on, what are we calling it now, Thomas Review?
Thomas Reviews. What's going to get a name change soon? We're going to be changing it to the Pater Noster Review, based off of Hilaire Belloc's first magazine, Pater Noster. And so that would be mainly because Thomas Reviews is a YouTube channel, and I don't like the same name for everything. It just seems weird. And no, we only have like 6 subscribers, so a name change this early on doesn't matter.
Perfect.
Actually, it's more than, it's like 30 something, but still anything under 50, I can change the name without feeling bad.
There you go.
Oh, and soon you, Bose, and everybody from the Thomas View stuff have to hop on for a late night stream because we got to celebrate 500 subscribers.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That'll be happening at some point soon.
Yeah.
Let me know when I can. Late night I can do. Kids are in bed.
Yeah, well, I want to do another 12-hour stream, but given this, like, the sun's up for 12 hours, might be easier now.
You should do a dawn to dusk stream in like, you know, in the Arctic Circle, or you should do a dawn to dusk stream in like November, so it's like an hour and a half.
That would be fun. I might have to do that. But anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. Barry, thanks again for coming on. Hopefully we'll get another one is out soon. I have several things in the works. I want to do a new series on biographies of great men, and kind of like a podcast version of Plutarch's Lives. But that requires guests and lots of prep, and we'll see if it happens. But regardless, everyone, thanks for listening. Have a good day, and God bless.